Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Flow podcast by Highland Yoga, hosted by founder Elsie Brotherton and co-hosts Reedy Dukes and Annalie Burke. Highland Yoga is an Atlanta-based hot yoga studio founded in 2015 in the quaint neighborhood of Virginia Highlands. And it's hard to wrap our minds around just how much we've grown and evolved since then. We already know our community is hooked on whatever magic is within our walls, and we want to offer you more outside of that. We can't wait to dive deep into all things yoga and wellness, but more importantly, what makes our world go round: our teachers, our devoted students, our community offerings, and more. Thanks for tuning into the podcast.
All right, we've got on the podcast today Dr. Kara Pepper, one of our longtime Highland Yoga students and someone I consider a good friend. Very excited to have her on today because she's got a very compelling story around her yoga journey, her experience with burnout, perfectionism as it relates to yoga, and then also her career trajectory. So that was kind of a mouthful. And so I am going to get Kara talking. Okay, so Kara, tell me about your yoga journey. When did you start practicing? What drew you to yoga initially?
I, as you know, was a professional ballet dancer long before I entered my current field in healthcare, and never really got into yoga, surprisingly, until I was in my 30s, and I would do it via video with my best friend in our living room on a towel. I didn't even have a mat. And so
I did not know that.
yes, well, Erica, as you know her. And
Oh,
the first year that Highland Yoga opened, which I think, if I remember correctly, it was 2016. Is that right?
15.
15. Oh, yeah. So she brought me to Highland Yoga, and I did one class, and it was with a high energy teacher. And I called after the class and said, where are your beginner classes? 'Cause I don't know what I'm doing. And that's kind of how I started there. I think I took naturally to it, but at the place I was in my life, which was all about achievement and perfection and excellence, I was like, I'm going to be the best Highland Yoga student. And best in my mind meant doing all the fancy tricks and headstands and all that. And I, in parallel, was going through huge career stress as a physician. And I was trying to figure out what to do with my life and feeling really lost. And I had this pivotal life moment, which you were absolutely part of. You probably remember that time that we went out to breakfast at the little biscuit place down the street. And I'm happy to tell that story, but it fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life and particularly at my relationship with yoga. So,
yeah, that was a really interesting moment for us to meet because I think I was maybe like 6 months into opening Highland Yoga. It was very early days. And looking back on that, it's like, man, I really was not the person to be giving life advice at that moment because I had also just quit my very serious law job with no money to open a yoga studio. And I did not know how to teach yoga or run a business. But I'm really glad to hear that that conversation helped. And it was a cool moment for me to connect with you as well. Okay, so you're coming to yoga and you're doing all of the fancy poses. I think what's really funny is that's how a lot of our students start.
yeah.
And it feels a little bit goal oriented in their practice. Yeah. And then the more you practice, the more you realize that that is really not the point of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even close. Okay, so I just want to hear about that. Like, how has yoga changed for you from just a practice perspective before we get into all the other questions I've got about this?
Yeah, so that's basically the fall of 2015 through 2020. I was doing the yoga thing, trying to get better in terms of the asanas themselves. I did the workshops. I kept pushing myself to do the more advanced poses. And I got to be a huge fan of Shavasana. And when I think about your studio particularly, it feels like church in the most pure version of church. It's a place of community, it's a place of connection, it's a place of connecting to the divine. And the fact that I could feel safe enough there to lay on the mat and just like weep, like that for me became like what yoga was really all about. So it was this yin and yang. I would kill myself doing the things and then I would lay on the mat and just have these like pivotal life visions and be like, oh, this is really what yoga is all about. And so that's how my yoga practice was until 2020. And as a physician on the front lines and feeling absolutely overwhelmed and exhausted trying to support everyone, my yoga practice could not be a place of stress for me anymore. It couldn't be a place that I needed to push. It needed to be a place of rest. And it really since then has been this place of recovery, not a place of pushing. And so my my practice looks like me laying on the mat a lot and doing a lot of like restorative poses now.
Um, I that definitely resonates for me. My practice has also changed quite a bit over the last 5 years or so. I did not realize COVID was such a big catalyst for that for you. So why COVID? What happened around COVID? How else was your life impacted?
So parallel to my yoga practice, because yoga is life and life is yoga, right? So, I was in this avoidant place in my life where work was my drug of choice. I knew that I could just, if my young children were misbehaving at home, I could come to work and feel really powerful and people would actually listen to me. If my marriage was on the rocks, I could come to work and feel appreciated and seen. And so yoga kind of reflected that. It was a place where I could learn these messages, but I certainly was still in this productive, achievement oriented place. And COVID for me as a physician, whatever limit I thought I could work to, there was an endless need, an endless amount of stress, and an endless amount of overwhelm. And yoga, I could not do that in yoga. And so I really kind of came to a place where I'd been burned out for a long time. I'd taken a leave of absence in early 2017, no, 2016, right after you and I had that conversation. And I really knew that I could not do life as I was doing it. I would absolutely regret life the way I was doing it. And I think COVID helped me recognize that for the first time I was mortal and that I could show up at work and be dead within a week. And so I would regret the way I was spending my life with this obsessive eye on success and productivity. And so it as a community, as a nation, as a world, slowed us down in a way, but it also helped me recognize that I wanted my life to look different. And so my yoga practice changed certainly, but my professional life changed. And so it was in the summer of 2021 that I made the decision in a wildly successful medical practice that I didn't want that anymore and I needed to change my professional career. So I quit my job and started my own practice and took a 2-year period of recovery where life looked a lot different. And that was just over 2 years ago.
So what was the timeline between kind of recognizing I don't want this and then actually quitting?
Yeah, I had not wanted it for many years from that sabbatical in 2016, but I'd kind of come back to work, rearranged deck chairs on that Titanic for a long time, tried to switch my career around, did all the things to kind of fix it. And I still had this idea that I was the problem, like I was broken if I could just be perfect enough or efficient enough or, do enough yoga or do enough self-improvement that I would feel better. And as it turns out, it was the job that I was in, it was the mentality that I had. And so I'd done years of therapy and coaching and yoga and self-reflection and job change. And then COVID is the thing that kind of sent it over the cliff. And so honestly, I didn't have a plan. My husband is an MBA and was like, "What's your business plan?" And I was like, "The plan is I'm going to quit my job and start seeing patients someplace else." And he was like, "Oh God, like this is not how business." And you as an entrepreneur know that's not exactly how businesses get done. But I turned in a letter of resignation in the summer of 2021. So that was what, like 5 years after I'd started that process and then left my job in 2022. I wanted a slow unwind for a variety of reasons, mostly in ensuring that my patients had a transfer of care and left in the spring of 2022. So it was a slow process, but it was necessary and compassionate on my end to do that.
Yeah, these kinds of big changes can take some time. Cool. Thank you for sharing that. So once you were gone in 2022, had left your job, you had 2 years. What did you do during that time?
Yeah. So the sabbatical that I took back in 2016, I think is important to note, was only 6 weeks. because that's a maternity leave. And I didn't give myself permission to think that I needed what I really needed, which was much longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I left my job, I said, okay, great. I'm going to do 6 weeks off and then I'm going to start this new job. And it was very clear to me in that first week, I was not ready to start. And that wasn't a business thing. That was, I am not well enough to like really commit to this new thing. So I took 3 months before I started seeing patients. And honestly, I was still so burned out that I was like, I can't do that. And if I don't start, I'm worried I will never start. So I gave myself permission to start seeing patients 2 hours a day. And so I had this very slow kind of up ramp. And I recognize that's from a place of privilege. I kind of saved some money to bridge me through this transition. I have a spouse who works and has our health insurance. So that certainly allowed me to have more time. Um, and every month that went by, I thought, oh, wow, I feel so much better. This is what normal feels like. And then a month would go by and be like, no, 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 this is what it feels like. I liken it to kind of like sinking to the bottom of a pool very slowly and finding that place of buoyancy. It really took me 9 months to feel human again. And I didn't realize that I needed that much time. So that's really what the first year was about, was really a ton of recovery. I was building my practice, of course, but not trying to overachieve for probably the first time in my life, and then allowing a slow up ramp. So here I am 2 years into this new business, and I'm back to as busy as I want to be, is how I would describe it. Not like I was before, but making a living and paying my bills, that kind of thing.
For sure. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this a little bit more. So, how would you define burnout? What did burnout feel like for you? Because I feel like one challenge some people have is they don't realize that they're in a state of burnout
Yes,
until
that's
it's
right.
over, until something catastrophic happens.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess my question is more of like, what would you say to someone who maybe in burnout but not realize it? What are some signs? What should people look for?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to define burnout, and the symptoms of that really overlap with a lot of mental health stuff. And also, we live in a society that normalizes the grind of burnout. So sometimes it's really hard to tell. Most people just don't know until they're, as you
Right.
said, like at the end of that. And so there's some primary things. Like one is emotional exhaustion, like everything feels exhausting all the time. You feel like the mental and emotional load is too much and you can't quite keep up. There's disconnection, like the work I'm doing is not meaningful to me and it doesn't matter. Um, and so from a very early phase, when we are starting to burn out, often we find ourselves just overworking. Like if I just work a little harder, just a busy week, just a season, and we just keep pushing. And then maybe there's some people around us who are like, wow, you're working all the time, or you're starting to miss out on things you really care about. We tend to have a lot of excuses. Like, this is just what's expected right now. Oh, it's just a busy season. My boss just needs this. Oh, it's a toxic workplace, but I'm just going to keep going. We kind of don't recognize the concern that people are offering us. Um, and we make excuses around that. And then there becomes like a period where we're really kind of not recognizing things and dissociating from them and doing things that are not typical for us. So, for example, you've got a kid. So, if you're like, listen, I just can't show up for any of their stuff anymore,
Mhm.
like, this is just how it is in my job. And you just like accept that as truth. And then there becomes compensatory behaviors very often. Maybe we're drinking more, maybe we're shopping more, maybe we're sleeping more. Maybe you think, oh, this is just like depression. I'm going to take some meds because that's what I need right now. And to be very clear, depression is real and sometimes people need meds, but it's this spectrum that finally leads to I have nothing left in the tank and I can't keep moving forward. And that's where I found myself during my first sabbatical. I literally couldn't get out of bed anymore.
Mhm.
And for me to say, I can't show up at work today, like that would have never happened. So for me, I was at the end of the line where everyone I knew in retrospect had been saying, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're going to keep doing this. I'm so worried about you. And I was just like, no, I've got it. I've got it. I've got it. And kept kind of pushing people away who were worried until I really couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm.
So the goal is to not wait until that place of total burnout, but to recognize maybe things are going awry before that happens.
What can you do if you notice these things in yourself? Like, because not everyone has the time, resources, whatever it may
Mhm.
be, to just say, pause, we're going on sabbatical. Like, what
Correct.
are
Yeah.
some things we can do to deal with this short of, taking a 9 month break?
Yeah, because that is absolutely not reasonable for 99.9% of
Sounds
people,
amazing
right?
though, I have to say.
Yeah, for me, it was quite literally life-saving and
Yep.
career-saving. So it became not optional for me. And to be clear, as someone, as a physician who fills out paperwork for people, I'm caring for people who are burned out and struggling with mental health. If you have FMLA benefits through your employer, absolutely you can take leave if that is something available to you, and your primary care physician should be able to help you facilitate that. But anyway, to answer your question, I think part of it is listening to the people around you. I always hated it when people said, "Wow, I just don't know how you're keeping up." I would feel like resentful and like, I don't want your pity. But I recognize now that was their way of saying to me, like, I'm really worried about you and I truly don't know how you're surviving right now. But that's not what I heard. It's not what I experienced. So if people are saying something, they've been thinking about it for a long time. So listen to the people that you trust. Even if you're not ready to act on it, just make note of that.
Mhm.
Um, Part of it is recognizing what matters to you, whether it's family or hobbies or, creative endeavors, like whatever the things are that you really value. And if those are starting to go on the back burner because you're grinding, that's information. Like maybe you're giving up the things that you really value. Um, Looking at your level of just general exhaustion, mental load, emotional load, physical load. If you are always tired, that is a sign that you're probably there. And also, if the things that you find purposeful, you're like, well, this just doesn't even matter anymore. Or like, I'm working so hard and like none of this is making a difference. That's also a sign that you're headed in that direction. And just like we talk about in yoga, it's all about just starting with a notice. Just
Mhm.
notice where you are. Sometimes that is the hardest part, is just slowing down enough to just notice that you're there. And then by noticing over and over and over again, that may encourage you to say, wow, I actually need to do something about this.
Yeah, I think having the mindfulness around it is really important. I guess just speaking for myself with burnout, because that's something you know, we talked about this before we started recording, but kind of riding this wave of I really love working
Hmm.
and I really love creating things. So I tend to take on a little bit more than I can chew sometimes. And, you know, when you just have so many things on your plate, you're definitely more prone to burnout, even if you, I think, enjoy your work because there
Yeah.
just are not enough hours in the day. And I think for me, the biggest challenge that I face is not recognizing burnout, it's asking for the help. But
Hmm.
asking for help is one of the biggest pieces of dealing with it.
Yep.
And I think this is where it intersects with the perfectionism,
Hmm.
because perfectionists don't necessarily like asking for help because it's kind of like conceding that you're not perfect.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think bringing in perfectionism to this conversation, this is maybe a good moment to do that, and then how yoga can help. So, I think you have described yourself as a recovering perfectionist,
Yeah.
which resonates. Although I'm not really in recovery, I still am a perfectionist. But tell me more, and tell me how this intersects with burnout for you.
Yeah. So perfectionism, the bottom line about it is that it's just a set of adaptive behaviors that help us avoid feelings of discomfort. So if I can just be good enough, if I can just be infallible, if I can just be the perfect parent, if I can just, do everything right, then I will never have to feel shame, failure, rejection, whatever you're trying to run from. And so work for me was very much that same way. I could show up at work and feel very proficient and valued, and I never had to like acknowledge being human outside of that. And so as it intersects with yoga, that version of me that was trying to have the perfect headstand and handstand, and felt really kind of like I wasn't good enough or failing, or I wasn't strong enough in some way. If I couldn't do those things, it was an absolute reflection of that. And the ability to like fall on the yoga mat, or not do things well, or to use assistive devices while you're doing yoga. I mean, I didn't even use a block for like the first 5 years that I
Like just
practiced,
on
right?
principle.
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
that's for people who are not good at yoga, right? And in fact, I'm like, no, that's actually what makes me better at yoga.
Oh, Lord.
So I think that point about asking for help, it's so interesting. Like just using a block to help you is a way to practice saying, hey, I'm at my limit. Can you help me in my
Mhm.
real life, right? Take that
Mhm.
yoga back out into the world.
Mhm.
So perfectionism absolutely showed up in all of those realms. And the more I was able to self-regulate my nervous system, the more therapy I did, the more practice I did on the mat in a meaningful way, the easier it was to just feel normal human feelings and recognize that that didn't define me. And it allowed me to kind of let go of some of that hustle culture that I was so ingrained with for so long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to think of yoga practice as an opportunity to practice
Mhm.
being bad at something and
Yeah.
like not being perfect, whatever that means for yoga. I mean, that's kind of a fiction itself. Like, there's no such thing as being perfect at yoga. Like, what does that
No.
even mean? You know,
Yeah.
it makes no
It,
sense.
yeah, it
Yeah.
makes no sense. Yeah, you're right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah, totally. Okay, so you've said this a few times. This is what normal feels like. You finally discovered that. What does it feel like for you?
For me, it is having time to recover and not feeling guilty about rest or unsettled in rest. If you're someone, if I said, "Hey, I just want you to sit on the couch and close your eyes for 5 minutes," and the thought of doing that like makes you want to crawl out of your skin, this is probably something you could use in your life. um, so the ability to have white space and to enjoy and luxuriate in that, and to recognize that when I am rested, my creativity, intuition, and problem solving is so much better. So it, in fact, makes me more productive. Sometimes you need that as kind of the incentive. Like, actually, if, for example, like if you're the person that always, when you're walking your dog or you're in the shower and you have these like amazing brainstorms, like that is your micro rest during the day. And that is proof that you need that in order to get out of productivity mode and into that like parasympathetic,
Mm-hmm.
intuitive space. And so, what feeling normal to me means I have time in my schedule that's blocked and protected for that, and that I'm not always trying to creep in with other obligations. It means having human connection, not being too busy for the people that really matter to me. Um, Time to do the things that are meaningful to me, and some of that really is work. I love the work I do. I love taking care of patients, and I'm better at it because I'm rested. Um, so that's what normal feels like to me. And as a consequence, I feel really happy and joyful, even though sometimes I feel things like shame and failure and avoidance. And I just recognize that as part of the full human existence. There is, I think the perfectionist in me thought, if I can just get this right, I'll be happy all the time. And that is not realistic. Like, there's no human on the planet who's ever happy all the time. In fact, I don't want to be happy all the time. I want to get mad with injustices in the world, or, frustrated when my kid doesn't do what I say. I want to have a normal human experience. And I just tolerate that a lot better now that I'm not striving for the fallacy of perfection all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, do you have practices now that help you get into this kind of more parasympathetic state? I'm just curious what you do to kind of maintain this state of normalcy.
Yeah. Um, So I've done all like the bro culture things of like you have to wake up at 5 a.m. and journal and like blah blah blah. And it always felt like one more thing I needed to do. So
Yeah.
actually for me, doing less of those disciplined structure things, because that just felt like one more thing that needed to get done. So for me, and there's a really good book on this called Closing the Stress Cycle, by the Nagoski sisters. I think I have it somewhere. But anyway, that book really kind of points to the things that settle our nervous system. So one of, so if you, so for me, what that looks like, taking notes from that book, is doing physical activity on a regular basis. For me, that's almost daily. And physical activity doesn't mean an hour of cardio. It may mean walking my dog and just leaving my phone at home. So I'm outside for 10 minutes moving my body. There's physical movement, there's being in nature. So hiking is now my drug of choice. So, having big moments like that, but also small moments of just stepping outdoors and getting fresh air. Human connection and being with someone that you feel safe laughing with or crying with. So I make a regular point of seeing my girlfriends on a regular basis, and planning dates with my husband. Part of that is physical connection where that's safe, and that doesn't have to be intimate connection. That can literally be like giving someone a hug, making sure that, I hug my kids on a regular basis, but having physical touch. It can be with a pet if you have a pet. And so all of those things signal to ourselves that like you're safe and you're okay. And so it builds human connection, but it also helps me slow down without the forced slowdown of like, okay, now you have to sit down and journal, or now you have to sit down on your couch and meditate. That always felt very antsy to me.
Cool. That's good. That's good. You mentioned technology, leaving your phone at home. Tell me how your connection to technology, or maybe disconnection in some ways, if at all, plays a role in any part of this.
Yeah. So for full disclosure, I have a solo practice that is a telemedicine practice and an in-person practice, and I'm licensed in 18 states. So my whole livelihood is around tech. Okay.
Right.
So this feels
Tech is
very
good. Tech is good. Yeah.
it is good. And I will tell you the things that I wish I didn't do. Maybe that would be helpful. Like I definitely sleep with my phone at my bedside. It is my alarm clock. And the first thing I do in the morning is to look at my phone. And that I notice on the days that I don't do that, I feel a heck of a lot better. I I try to leave my phone at home when I take the dog for a walk because that really helps me detach. And I built a business to say, these are my boundaries around work. So, like, I'm not going to answer your emails at 2 in the morning to set expectations for people around me. But I think the bigger moments for me are like, for example, I'm going on a trip next week and I emailed my practice and I said, I'm going to be off the grid, literally in the woods. I will not have Wi Fi or my computer. This is how you can manage your healthcare. But for me to tell people, hey, this is what I'm doing, is really helpful. And so I'm not going to travel with my computer. I'll just have my cell phone. So that's helpful. You, I mean, at 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings when you get that alarm from Apple saying you were on your phone 14 hours every
Quite
day this week.
disturbing.
Yeah, I don't use 14 hours, but I could use less of it. It's a work in progress, is the short answer to your question.
Yeah. I think we've touched on some of this stuff, but I'm just kind of curious. What would you recommend for someone who's dealing with burnout and perfectionism as well? Like if you're listening and you're like, I identify these things in myself, I feel like I could be a perfectionist or I could be burnt out. Like what's the first starting point? Where should they go? What should they do?
If you could do one thing, I would recommend sitting down and writing pen to paper, and I truly mean that. If you could ask future you, the person 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what advice they have for you today, what would they say? If you could write down your perfect day of what this season would look like, what would they tell you that would look like? It's really a question about anticipatory regret. There's a beautiful article that was written years ago by an Australian hospice nurse named Bronnie Ware, who interviewed all of her patients who were dying and asked them what they regret. And she wrote this article called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the first two, if we could just get those two right, it would fundamentally change our world. The first was that folks live for other people's expectations. This is just what we're doing. This is what it's expected of me. This is what I need. And I wish that I would have been more aligned with what really matters. And the second is that people work too much. And that question about asking future you, what would you wish I knew today? What do I need to learn? What do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing in baby steps? It gives you perspective about what you really value. And for me, that moment in COVID where I was like, I could be dead and I would absolutely regret how I'm spending the season of my life. My parents are aging, my children are in high school. I'm working way too much and I could be dead and this is what they would remember about me. That hit me in a way that nothing else had really hit me. And I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I don't know how I'm going to stop, but I can't do this. And so making those tiny little baby changes added up to something really big over the course of several years. So asking yourself what you would regret about the season is a good place to start.
That's really good. That's really good. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I recommend if you are going to be on social media, you have to follow Kara because she has really good content around these topics. Where can people find you?
Yeah, if you can remember my name, you can find me. It's Kara with a K, Kara, last name Pepper. Yes, I'm Dr. Pepper. Kara Pepper MD is my handle on all social media platforms. It's my website. And you're welcome to find me and follow me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and especially today to dive deeper into your journey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Your support really does matter. This podcast is produced by Highland Yoga with music by our very own teaching team member, Lauren C. If you want to learn more about Highland Yoga, visit our website at highland-yoga.com or email us to sign up for our weekly newsletter at info@highland-yoga.com. See you next week for more of Find Your Flow.